You're listening to Remotely One, a podcast that educates, entertains, and inspires you to take your life back from the office commute. I'm Rick, a former beer rep who left the warehouse to become a voice actor and digital creator.
And I'm Kaleem, a remote work advocate and consultant. We're going to speak with some of the top professionals who have managed to avoid the commute as they share stories from the most inspiring to the most comical, all while working remotely.
Man, this sounds awesome. Let's clock in.
I often tell this, but I used to be a neuroscientist. In that work, what I would do is I would open the brains of rats and stick electrodes in them.
Okay, can we talk a little bit more about that? Like, you can't just throw that out there, so...
I think you should. That's got shock value.
I mean, it does have shock value, but I need to know a little bit more about these rats, okay? So, were they cute little rats? Were they dirty rats? Like, so you didn't feel bad about what you were doing to them?
Did they know karate? Did they live in the sewers of New York City?
I could talk to you for hours about this. So a lot of the knowledge that we have about the brain is based on experimental research that we do. And we do that with mice and rats and sometimes even monkeys, for example, and so to some degree humans. And the research that I did, we were looked into how does the brain process information. And the way we did that was that we played sounds to rats. So I would fix a rat in a setup that I made with speakers around it, and we played sounds to it, and we would want to record the brain activity. But if you want to record what your neurons are actually doing, you actually have to stick an electrode in there. You can't measure it from the outside. And so what I would do is I made a little hole inside of their skull, and then I would stick an electrode with a fork in it, and it allowed us to triangulate individual neurons and see their activity based on the sounds that I was playing to those rats. So that's the research that I did for a few years before I left to start working in startups.
That's fascinating.
That's incredible. You don't run into somebody that's drilled into the skulls of mice and rats every day.
Yeah, we used the drills the dentists use for that. Yeah, that's the sound. Yeah.
You actually did that.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Unbelievable. Welcome back to Remotely One. I'm your co-host, Rick Haney, joined by my esteemed colleague, Kaleem Clarkson. How you doing today, buddy?
Oh, man, I'm feeling good, man. I'm nervous about today's guest. Oh, man, I'm feeling good. You're looking great as usual, bro. You're looking good as usual. Wait, you're a little jacked up. Are you on your third cup of coffee already? You ready to go today?
Well, I am jacked up, but it ain't because of the coffee, I'll tell you that much. Really? Went to the doctor last week to get my shit in order.
Okay.
And he's like, you got to get rid of the coffee, bro. And I'm like, excuse me? Who the hell do you think you're talking to? I don't get rid of coffee, you know?
No.
And he's like, okay, but your heart's going to explode. And I'm like, okay, I'll get rid of coffee.
Okay.
So I did my due diligence, and I discovered this new product, okay? It's called Magic Mind. And it's just a one shot that I take in the morning. I just took a sip of it right now, as you can see. And it's amazing. It's organic, gluten-free, dairy-free, and it gives me the boost straight into the flow zone without that caffeine. So it's pretty incredible.
I can't even imagine it, bro. You, Rick, no more caffeine? Come on.
I know, right? But you know what? It turns out I don't even miss the caffeine. I don't even need it. This stuff has me laser focused. No more crashing into that wall of brain fog later in the day. I mean, I'll be honest. I love it so much that I want to be able to offer it to our audience. What do you think about that?
No shit, man. That sounds good to me, bro. How do we do it?
Well, you got to go to magicmind.com/remotely one. And once you do that, you get up to 56% off on your subscription for the next 10 days or 20% off your one-time purchase with our code remotely120. All caps.
Remotely 120. That's it. Just put it in.
So REMOTELYONE20.
Bam!
Actually, Kaleem, I think you should be one of the first people to do it because it's amazing. You're going to love this stuff.
I'm going to get to it. All right, I'm going to try it.
And with that out of the way, Kaleem, give us a tease or two about today's guest.
Oh, sir. So today's guest, okay, they're across the pond, should we say. Our guest, they grew up... Oh. Don't do it. Don't get me giggling already, guy. Don't get me giggling already. Our guest, they grew up and they're currently a resident of Amsterdam. So, you know.
Oh.
You know, is that the red light district? Is that the right thing?
I don't know anything about it.
I don't know anything about that. Guest, am I thinking of the right country? And
The red light district is in Amsterdam. Yeah, it's not where I live.
Okay.
Okay. But our guest has never been there. But it does exist.
Yep.
It does exist.
Okay.
Let's see. Listen, education-wise, again, Rick, sometimes you have people who are just educated, right? Like highly educated.
Yeah.
Then you have people who, do experiments and shit. So our guests today, they have their bachelor's, you ready for this? In psychonomics. Cool.
Oh, we're going to get learnt today.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about that. Then they have their master's degree in cognitive neuroscience. And they're both from the University of Amsterdam, sir.
Wow. Okay, I'm excited for that.
In fact, Rick, our guest, they used to drill holes in rats' brains in the name of science.
What?
Yeah. Guess, how many rats have you actually drilled holes in their brains roughly? How many rats have you done this to?
Tens.
Just 10?
Tens?
Okay. I thought he was going to say tens of thousands. I was like, oh shit.
No, it's tens. It's tens.
Okay. So our guest has done some great stuff in the name of science. Let's see, our guest, they used to be the VP of product. You ready for this, Rick?
Yes.
For a little company that everyone's heard of today. The company's name is GitLab.
No way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Darren used to work there. We're coming at you, Darren. He's no longer there, but he used to be there with him. Yep.
Yeah.
He used to be the VP of product at GitLab, okay? When the company grew from 5 to over 400 people, I guess, what number of employee were you?
3, I think.
Holy sugars.
Wow.
We have the number 3 employee at GitLab on our show right now. Yeah, that company's now worth over $1 billion, Rick. That company that he used to work for is now worth over $1 billion. That's a lot.
We're out of our league, bro.
Seriously. Shout out to GitLab for hosting Drupal.org's repository.
Indeed.
For the past 6 years, our guest, he's been a host on a couple different podcasts. He used to be the host of Remote Work Podcast. Is that correct? You still doing that?
No, I stopped.
Okay. He stopped. Okay. He's the leading online entrepreneur of the year in 2022, which was issued by the Lowy Foundation. Our guest today is currently the CEO of Remote.com, which is a global HR platform that helps you manage your employees all around the world. Get this, Remote.com, they've raised over $500 million, Rick. So you can absolutely build a remote company and get it funded. Listeners and viewers, please give a warm welcome to Joop van der Voort!
Oh, yeah.
Woo! Let's go, baby! Let's go! Ow!
All right, settle
this.
down, people.
This is the best introduction I've ever gotten.
Be quiet, studio audience.
All right,
They get
down in
excited.
front, relax.
They get excited. Sorry about that. Love to have you. Love to have
Welcome
you.
to the show, Joop.
Thanks for having me. That was great. I'm done for today.
How was that for an intro, huh?
That was good. This is the last thing I'm doing today before my weekend starts, so it's a pretty good way to go about it.
Oh, my gosh.
I am just so happy you really said yes to join us. I know you're a busy person. You've been on every Remote Work podcast. I mean, hell, you must have paid $20 million for remote.com, the domain name. So
I think it's going to be more over time. Yeah, something like
Wow.
that. Yeah.
I'm sure it will be.
holy shit. So thank you very much. It's honestly a pleasure. Really is.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from you. I've got so many questions. Diving right in, the first thing I'm most intrigued about is the relationship between psychology of human behavior and brain science is a major element in your background. Obviously, that's what you do. But as a scientist, what was it like for you to witness the world's reaction to the pandemic and the sudden shift toward remote work that followed it, and now, of course, with remote work becoming so widely sought?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. When I was working at GitLab, I had this realization that I didn't really understand why we were working from an office. I was working as a software engineer right before I joined GitLab, and I worked in an office, and I would work in the train on the way to the office and do the exact same thing in the office and on the way back. And I was wondering, why do I have to be in an office at all? It doesn't make any real sense. I guess if there's anything I got from science, is to be hyper skeptical, which my wife doesn't necessarily love. But I'm hyper skeptical about anything that's a given, right? Without having a clear reason why, right? And I think the reaction of the world of like realizing, oh, we don't have to be in the office was very interesting to see, because for me, it was already a thing that was very, very clear. Like, yes, if your work is entirely on the internet, obviously you don't have to be in the office. There's nothing magical that happens when you sit next to each other looking at the computer, right? It's all the other things that you do that make work great, and they can be done pretty well online as well. And so it was certainly interesting. It was definitely not a bad time to be the CEO of a company called Remote with the domain remote.com.
For sure.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, for real, for real. So let's go back to employee number 3. I can't believe that. I should have known this, sir. I should have known. I'm disappointed in myself. So what was it like in those early days, before 50 employees, even at GitLab? So you're building this product that's trying to rival GitHub, I think, like you're trying to conceptualize something where it appeared like the market was dominated. At what point did you kind of look at each other and say, hey, I think we're onto something with this product of GitLab? Could you just talk about like what those really early days were like? And why did you all decide from day one, or, the founders, how did you all decide to be remote in that company?
Yeah, so GitLab was an open source project that started in 2011 by Dmitry, and he was living in Ukraine at the time. And then in 2013, I was working at this job as a software engineer, having just left science. And I was working next to Sid, the CEO and founder of GitLab. He was also just working there, a job, the same as I was. We were just programming. Wow. And so he left that to focus solely on GitLab. And he was like, Job, do you want to join me? And at the time I told him no, but a few months, like 2 months later, we were chatting. I think it was one of the Google chat versions, Hangouts or something at the time. And I was about to go for a job interview the next day. And he called me and he was like, let's chat. He says, I will offer you whatever your current salary is and you come work for me. I was like, okay, that sounds good. And so GitLab at the time was, Dmitry was living in Ukraine. We had Marin, who was living in Serbia and coming over to the Netherlands once in a while. Sid and I were living in the Netherlands both. And then we had one other guy, Jacob, and he was also in the Netherlands. And so there was no office that we could go to, right? And technically, GitLab already existed for several years as an open source project. And so we figured, well, we operate the company as an open source project, essentially. Very transparent, but also there's no office. Everybody is on equal footing because everything we do is out in the open and online. And so the first thing we had to address was like, well, how are we going to monetize this? And is there a path to monetization? But because it was an open source project that was somewhat successful already, we quickly realized that there were probably many companies already using GitLab internally. And it was very hard to track this. We didn't have any ways to track this. But what we started to see is that there were some extremely large companies, like the largest companies in the planet, they were using GitLab in some form or another. Right? Often what they had is they had some other solutions, some outdated pre-Git kind of source control, and then teams would individually bring in GitLab because it was open source, so they would just set it up. That would start to grow very massively. And before we started the company, there was no company to support them. There was nobody to reach out to. And so when we said, well, we're going to sell support, we're going to make an enterprise version, some of those companies started to reach out to us. And so we quickly realized that the little open source project and then the company we were building, there was massive potential behind it because there were probably, we estimated, more than 100,000 companies or more than 100,000 instances of GitLab worldwide, of which at least a percentage, would probably want to buy something from us. And so we realized this quite early on, but it was intimidating because we were up against GitHub, which everybody knew. And by the time that we started, they had already 100 million in funding, which looking back is kind of funny because I remember thinking 100 million, nobody ever needs 100 million. That's more money than any company ever raised. At least that's what I thought at the time. But, it was at the same time, we felt like a really small company. I remember when we had 9 employees, I said, wow, we're a real company now. And, we went through Y Combinator and it still felt really surreal. I always thought like we were unimportant compared to all those other companies. But I think looking back, GitLab is one of the success companies coming out of Y Combinator as well.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So as GitLab began to grow and progress as a company, you had to start hiring people from all over the world. Can you talk about maybe what were some of the challenges that you guys were dealing with that motivated you over time to start remote.com.
Yeah, it's very interesting because the challenges that we anticipated basically didn't exist, as in like finding people, making sure they matched well, that they had the skills that we needed, or cultural barriers. I get a lot of questions about building teams, and then people talk about the cultural barriers. We never faced any of those, and I still haven't, right? Like, we've never experienced that as a real challenge. The main challenge that we faced...
Can I stop you right there before you get into your major challenge?
Yeah.
Because like you just went over that very quickly.
That's shocking.
Can you just re-emphasize specifically what you all assumed? Because right now, a lot of companies are making assumptions about what's wrong with remote work and forcing them to return to the office. What were those things that you just said that you assumed that were going to be challenges? And then how were there no cultural challenges? I mean, that's amazing.
Well, I mean, we assumed that we will come across problems in the abstract, right? How many companies existed before GitLab that were like fully distributed and built a company like that from scratch and like high growth and well funded? It was very rare. There were companies that were working remotely a lot, but there wasn't anybody to copy. There was not a blueprint for the kind of company we were building.
Right.
Now it's very different, I think. And so we didn't necessarily know what we anticipate, but we did anticipate problems to exist. So I still remember us saying, like, if we need to open an office at some time, we will. Right? Like, if we feel like that is necessary. And that moment just never came, because the problems that we had anticipated related to remote work or time zones, they didn't exist. And then, the cultural one is one that I get asked about, and it never really became, I never experienced that to be an issue, right? And so we had at GitLab, we had our handbook, we have the same now at Remote, and we clearly outlined, like, these are our communication standards, this is how we treat each other. Given that, in reality, we never really faced problems with, like, there's a cultural difference between different people. I think when you hire people from everywhere, and especially as we did at GitLab, when I left, we had people in 67 different countries. You know, the population in your company, the employees, it's so varied that there's not like an US-centric culture necessarily, or there's not a Dutch-centric culture necessarily that then makes others stick out from that, but rather it's just heterogeneous in itself, and it makes that there is no cultural barrier other than the fact that, well, you need to be able to speak the language, right? And you need to be willing to assume good intentions and do a favorable interpretation, right? Because not everybody can write really effectively. And not everybody takes the time to write very effectively. But if you are able to, like, make a little leap of assuming good intentions of whatever somebody says to you, then there really aren't any true cultural hurdles to cross when you're talking about, well, we're writing software together, right? Like, together, we work together. We are all experts in our field. We have to write software. One of my favorite things, and one of the things that I took away from at GitLab was, well, it's such a pleasure to work with people from all over the world, because you cannot make any assumptions about what is normal, right? Wow. What is in the immediate environment, and probably your friends and your family, you know, that's mostly, you have standards that you think are very clear, right? The simplest one is like Christmas. Not everybody celebrates Christmas, right? But the other one is also like, there's a northern and a southern hemisphere, and the seasons are inverted. So when it's warm for you, it's cold for somebody else. You know, I think those are the simplest ones, but there's so many things like that seem very normal, or like pillars in your own life that aren't in those of other people. And that is easy to read about on Wikipedia when you read about a different culture. But it's much more fun when you speak to somebody who lives such a different life in so many ways. But then in the end of the day, you're both working together to, I don't know, in our case, make software, you know, and like we have the same opinions about how we make software. And to me, that was just, you know, that was a great pleasure. Now, what didn't work at GitLab, or never worked well, was the bureaucracy that we had to deal with. Because if you want to hire somebody in another country, you have to abide by that country's laws, labor laws, tax laws, everything. Jeez. You have to offer local benefits. And every country has started from scratch writing these rules and writing these laws. Even in the European Union, they are different country by country, completely different, like not even remotely similar. There's not one, and I know this now for a fact, there's not one country where these are the same. And so it's really hard to hire people in different countries. But in all countries, if you want to hire somebody locally, you need the local entity, because all the laws are designed around the fact that businesses exist in the real world, right? So virtual businesses that write software and exist only on the internet, they were not a thing until like 15 years ago. And so
Right.
given that all these laws and all these labor laws and protections are designed for physical companies in the real world, assuming that people go to a place to do their job there, you as a company are expected to act as such. And that's really hard. There's no good solution for that. And that's what we found at GitLab. And that ultimately made me start remote, because any solutions that were out there were really, really poor. And I figured if we solve this, we solve the problem of actually, as an individual born anywhere on the planet, getting access to great opportunities.
That is fascinating.
It is fascinating. So basically, listeners, viewers, whenever you have a challenge, all the great inventions start, or all the great products start by scratching an itch that you have. And it sounds like this is the same type of thing. And you're like, listen, we're having a real big problem. GitLab's growing. We have to hire people all over the world. Damn, this is frustrating. How are we going to do this? Oh, he was like, I got an idea. I'm going to build this product to solve that problem. Peace out, GitLab. Now, let me ask you this. How supportive was GitLab in your endeavor in the beginning? Because there's a good amount of articles out there, or a new trend of companies funding their employees' entrepreneurial ideas and activities. And there's actually kind of motivation and return from the companies that do that. Like, hey, look, go ahead. That's a great idea. Go ahead and do your thing. So how was that relationship in the beginning?
So when Sid asked me to join GitLab, I told him I'm going to just stick around for 1 year because I want to start my own startup. And he was like, that's great. That's fine. You do that. I ended up sticking around for 5 years. But by the time that I decided to leave, he asked me to stay on longer. I said, no, I really want to do my own thing. And I explained him what I was going to do. And they were supportive. GitLab didn't fund me in any particular way, but I earned enough money to have savings so that I could start by myself. And it was not GitLab that I needed the help from. Later on, Sid actually did invest in remote, and they are a customer, of course. So I would say as helpful as could be. I think funding we never struggled to find, but customers you always want more of. And of course, the support from Sid was great.
That's awesome.
That's really great. I got to tell you, shifting gears real quick, those New York City ad placements are absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I'm glad you like that.
I've seen the posts.
What were some of them? I don't think I've seen them. What did they say?
They are like, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. And we posted them all over where a lot of commuters are going, and things like that. Yeah.
Well, I wish I spent more time in the car.
That's great. Genius.
Oh, they were brilliant. But, I'm in speaking of those, I'm wondering, were they partly responsible for you guys being recognized as G2's #1 global employment platform? And congratulations on that, by the way.
Thanks.
That's a heck of a feat.
Shout out.
I have no idea why they do those things. The ads certainly are not involved. I think it's mostly driven by like customer reviews and a few other factors. So
okay, cool.
I don't know the wizardry that involves in it, but when we get to #1, I will happily celebrate it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Now you have a reason to. So as a result of these ads, have you had any negative feedback from business leaders who are really pushing for a return to the office?
Not at all. That's one.
Good.
I mean, they steer clear. They know and I'm not the right person to argue with.
Right.
In the abstract, we don't really see the return to the office as like slowing of the acceleration of remote work, for example.
Explain.
Right? What drives our business, right? What the kind of world I want to create, it's not about remote work in of itself. It's about, I want that businesses start out being international from day one. And I want that people have access to opportunities independent of where they are, right? Those are the kind of changes that I want to see in the world. Now, and those are driven partially by our work, but in a large part, they are driven by the need to hire great people. And that doesn't change, right? If you are a business, you start a new business or you are a growing business, you are incredibly constrained on talent. And if you have offices and you require everybody to be in the offices, that means that the pool of talent that you're fishing from is extremely local and extremely limited. The moment you say, well, you can work remotely, you suddenly have a massive talent pool. So much so that it's almost a problem.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because you're going to get so many applicants and the demand for remote work is so high. And so that keeps going up over time. And of course, you see a big split between employers that say, well, you have to come back to the office. And then you see a large part of their employees leaving those employers. And I think only like the Metas and Apples of the world can do that. And even there, you see attrition of workforce, right? People leaving them, no matter how well they pay, no matter how amazing their job is, they see them leaving because people realize that, well, I get so many more hours in the day if I don't have to commute, right? It's not even about the office itself. If I don't have to commute, I get so many more hours that I can do whatever I want. Play the guitar, spend time with my kids, right? And that is ultimately what people value above everything else. You know, if your basic needs met, it's freedom.
Yeah, you all said it at the exact same time, bro.
Yeah.
Freedom!
We never take our freedom!
If you won't do it, you tell me! Yes, it's a Rage Against the Machine. Freedom! It's my favorite Rage, one of my favorite Rage songs.
That's great.
Awesome.
That's great.
Love that song. So, I got to ask you this question, and you know, you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, because it's probably one of the most controversial questions when you talk about remote work. And you guys are kind of involved in payment processing. So you decide how you want to answer it. I would love to know what your thoughts are on location-based pay and location-independent based pay. Basically, I mean, I know you know, but I'll explain it for the listeners and viewers who may not know. Basically, location-based pay is we're going to pay you based on the rates of where you live. So if you live in San Francisco, you're going to get paid more than if you live where Rick and I are from, Maine. Or location-independent pay, where you pay everybody the same and you're paying most likely on the highest rate. So one, what is your personal view on that type of pay, number one? And then number two, I'd love to know, like, what are you seeing the most with your clients and what people are doing?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to fall into a trap of talking about what is fair and what does fair mean. The reality is that the talent market is a market, right? Which means that there is supply and demand, supply of talent and demand from employers. And if I am an employer, I have a limited amount of money that I can spend.
Correct.
And so my options are extremely limited, right? My option is either I'm going to hire 10 people for $10 each, or I'm going to hire, I don't know, 20 people for $5 each, right? Or balance in between that.
Right.
And so if I go as an employer, I want to have people that are happy. I want to have people that feel like they're well rewarded for their job. Otherwise, they will leave me, right?
Okay.
That's the dynamics of the market of talent, right? And so if I offer to somebody in Portugal, for example, $5,000 a month, they're going to get paid significantly above the local. I used to live there, so I know the rates pretty well. Significantly above the average salary there. The average salary of a software engineer in Portugal that is employed locally is like $1,500 equivalent. Now, maybe a little bit more, maybe $2,000.
Okay.
So if I'm going to offer $5,000, those people will be incredibly happy. They can live an incredibly full life, and they will have all the money in the world to do whatever they want.
Okay.
And as an employer, I can hire a lot of people there. I can hire half or less than half the people if I'm going to hire those in San Francisco. And so to whom is this unfair if I do this like this? That is how a market works. Now, if I'm going to say, well, I'm going to hire independent of location, then either I have an infinite money glitch that I somehow used and I can just hire infinite people from anywhere and I'm going to pay everybody the same rate, or I'm going to end up underpaying depending on the region, right? I'm going to say, well, I'm going to pay everybody $5,000 a month, but, well, then just nobody from San Francisco will ever work for me. And so as an employer, you have not the choice to say, I'm going to pay independently of location. You have the choice to say, where am I going to hire from? Do I want to hire from everywhere? Because if I want to hire from everywhere, I have to be able to pay top of market, right? If I'm going to hire somebody in San Francisco, I will have to pay top of market regardless. And if I also want to hire somebody in Portugal, why would I then pay them 4 times more than would already be amazing salary for them? Yes, I can literally take any talent out of the company, but I have a limited amount of money as an employer because it's a business. And so what is going to happen is that I'm going to hire fewer people than I would otherwise be able to and expect them to do 4 times the amount of work, right? It has to work out at the end of the day. And so I'm not an advocate for either model. I just think it's a market.
You're a genius. That's called the block and bridge. You are going to be a politician, sir. It's a great answer, and I love it. It's a great answer, and I love it.
So perfectly put.
But I will tell you this. So we have, of course, a lot of data on it. Nobody pays independent of location. There is like
Really?
3 companies. Yeah, there's like 3 companies in the world that really loudly say it. And the ones that do, it's always temporary because you're going to run into all sorts of things. You're going to run into, oh, I pay everybody independent of location. But like once I hit scale, that's no longer doable. Or I'm going to pay everybody poorly. And then I'm going to have a really high regrettable attrition, as we call it, right? Which is like people are leaving my company because they level up, they get good, and they realize, well, my talents, I get paid double for them elsewhere.
That's
right. And you have that problem anyway. Now, here comes the beautiful part of this. The better remote does its job, the less this becomes a problem. Because the more companies that are hiring remotely, the more the low salary locations will start to elevate their salaries. In other words, when I was living in Portugal, 6 years ago or so, I remember that there was a university close to where I lived, and the average salary of people coming out there was like €1,000, which is like nowadays $1,200.
Okay.
Nowadays, the average salary of people there, because they're starting to work remotely is like €4,000. So it's like 4x.
Wow.
Why is that? It's because there are many more remote organizations. And those individuals also know that they can't get a remote job, right? And so the harder companies like remote, especially remote, of course, work to elevate, bring opportunities to people everywhere, the more you will see low cost locations, as they call it, right, in the boardroom, they start to rise as well, and you see more leveling. And so what companies like us have to do is like we have to constantly revise what is the minimal pay in any given region, and like over time this will smooth much more. So you might still have to pay really high for San Francisco because the density of like companies competing for talent also locally, but in the rest of the world, it's going to get higher and higher. And there's never I hope that we get to the point where there's no cheap labor anymore, right? At least for high demand roles. Like it doesn't make any sense. And so it resolves itself. And that's why it's a market. That's the market function doing its work.
Wow. I'm definitely going to steal that because I'm a firm believer of I'm definitely a firm believer of location-based pay because exactly what you were saying. And even if an employee leaves, obviously they all need to know all these things ahead of time, and it has to be well documented. And outside of that, I do believe, because I think by you saying a market, it really does change the mentality of thinking about that type of pay. Because if you're in a market in a different country, you can live at a different type of level that you could live. And that's kind of what you're compensating somebody for, is to live some sort of standard of living. So I really do love that I was just messing with you a little bit, but I do love that explanation of it's a talent market. So markets aren't necessarily fair or unfair. They're based on demand, supply and demand. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, speaking of stealing things from you, Job, I'm going to put you on the spot here with something you said recently. Okay. You posted about New Year's resolutions, I believe it was, and the one you specified was spend more time on what's important and less on what is urgent. And that just, I'm going to carry that with me for the rest of my days because I just find it so inspirational, and it kind of ties into the psychology of, what we're talking about here. But do you find that a lot of people get those two things confused? And in your opinion, how does remote work help them realign themselves to what is important to them?
I don't necessarily know if those things get confused, but I do see in my own work that it's very easy to fall into the habit of just dealing with urgent things, even if those urgent things just seem urgent, right? Like email.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people get stuck in doing email, which is, and myself included, right? Which in of itself is not an impactful thing. Some of those emails might be impactful, but for the most part, it really isn't, right? And I see this with people working at remote as well, is that they fall a lot into doing things for the sake of doing things, right? There's a lot happening, and I feel like I have to catch up with things. But really, how I orient myself and how I schedule my own time is I think about what is high impact. I will do that, and everything else I don't really care about. Like, it might seem very urgent, but if it's actually important, it will come back to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so sometimes some important things are important and urgent, and then you deal with them appropriately. Now, how does remote work relate to that? Not at all, right? I think that remote work sometimes makes these things harder to deal with and sometimes easier, but on the aggregate, I think it doesn't really change things, right? I think the nature of work is still very much the same. It's good to not have a hovering manager, but if your company doesn't do remote work really, really well, you might be stuck in a lot of things that seem urgent anyway, or you might still be stuck in, the other awful thing, which is like meetings, right? Which are arguably worse when you do them remotely. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are prime examples of why I asked the question to begin with. You said hovering manager and meetings, and most people would rather do without those things, or at least the hovering manager part. So
that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. One last question before Rick's question. What do you think about hybrid? And do you think hybrid's going to last?
Hybrid will last for a really long time, but it's a very abstract word. What does it mean? Does it mean that you are required to be in the office? When are you required in the office? Does it mean office is optional? Is it required for everybody at the same time? And so depending on like the form, it can or can't work. But my general reply is it's the worst way to work because you're not optimizing for anything, right? You create a situation where if you require people to come to the office at all, then you immediately remove the benefit of being able to hire from anywhere. So it removes a massive benefit from it. Yeah. The second one is that if you require people to come into the office at the same time, then you get the benefit of being together in the same place, which is a really easy way to communicate. But what is going to happen inevitably is that you are going to segment your time on office days and non-office days. In other words, you're going to do certain activities when you are in the office and certain when you are not, rather than optimizing in general, right? And as a business, you want your cycle times, the time that it takes from an idea to a decision or an action or an outcome, to be as short as possible. But if you have a cycle of a week in which 2 days you are in the office and you're going to wait for them to have a meeting, make a decision, review something, it means that all your decisions are going to slow down to, at least a week. Because on Wednesday you decide you want to decide something, but on Monday is the next time you're in the office and that's where you have meetings. Then you're going to wait until Monday. So it slows your whole business down. Besides the fact that you will not spend time optimizing the remote experience, right? Because the remote experience the default remote experience is bad. You are all apart by yourselves. You have to make it work, right? You have to spend time thinking about how do we communicate with each other? How do we work together? And if your social battery gets filled up, if you can fall back to those days that you're in the office, then you're not going to do that. And so, I think hybrid is the worst way to work. What I do think is a good way to work is if you say, we are fully remote. Everybody's always remote. There's no required days to be office. You don't have to live near the office, but offices exist where you can go to and hang out with your colleagues, work from, host events and such. That is really great. That seems like a luxury version of remote working. Yes. Because we, for example, at my company called Remote, we get together sometimes. We always have to find a space, et cetera, et cetera. So like having an office available is good. Is can be really, really convenient. And many people are not able to work from home, for example. So you either need co-working space or an office. So there's nothing wrong with offices in themselves, but required attendance to offices removes so many advantages from remote work.
Yeah, great answer, and I 100%
amazing
agree.
insight.
You just broke it down so perfectly. You've definitely been asked this question before, because you came down with the fire. It is the worst, and what you just painted as a picture. Could you imagine if offices were conference spaces, basically? Because everybody, you're hearing all of these reports of. Now, nobody actually wants to sit in a cubicle and all the conference room space is booked straight out. So nobody even is able to utilize the office in the way that they want to utilize the office today. And how they want to utilize it is exactly how you explained it. Let's get everybody in a room, have some breakout rooms, connect with other people. Let's do some cool stuff for connections, some strategic stuff. And then we'll see you all in another month or so and go home and do all the heads down work while you can focus. So I 100% love your answer. It's awesome.
That's great. That's amazing. So final question. Could you share with us?
Oh, yeah.
I get so amped up for this question. Could you share with us a comical or inspiring moment you may have had while working remotely?
Yeah, I thought about this and I was like, what do I tell?
What can I tell?
But then I was discussing this with my wife and I was like, oh no, it's this story. And she was like, yeah, that's definitely this story.
Shout out. Can we say your wife's name before you tell your story? Give her a little love.
Yeah, it's Carla.
All right. Shout out, Carla. Shout out, Carla, for signing off. Shout out.
All right.
So we started remote pre-pandemic in 2019. I just had my daughter was born 6 months before I started remote. So we started working remote, and I worked really hard, but I worked from home, of course. And so as you can imagine, and my wife and I were both at home, and I would work and take care of the kid, and my wife would work and take care of the kid, and it was really, really busy. And I would do my calls in the basement of our house, and at the time there were no walls or doors or anything upstairs where my wife was, so I could hear everything. And we've been building remote for a while, and we figured it's time to raise money. And so when you start raising money, what you do is you contact a lot of investors, and then eventually one of them will get on a call with you. And so I had my very first investor meeting. It was like the end of the afternoon.
How big's the VC, just to give us a little bit of nervousness?
I mean, I don't want to give away too much, but
Okay,
they were
okay.
they were a good one. They're
good.
They're a good fund.
Okay.
And so I had my first pitch ever, right? Like I've never pitched to a VC. I had visited a few while I was at GitLab, but I've never pitched to a VC. My ID, remote, this was like all super, super early. This is literally the very first. And this is a big fund in numbers, but it's a small fund in number of people. So they had their entire investment team on the call. And so I was presenting, and I was, 10 minutes into my pitch. And my wife, who is a really calm person and really in control, she screamed from upstairs. And I could hear it very clearly because there were no doors.
Of course.
And she goes, Job, you have to come. Job. And what do? I'm in the middle of my pitch. I'm like, I'm sorry, I have to come. And she kept screaming, Job, June, name of my daughter, June is choking. So I said, my wife is screaming that my daughter is choking. I'll be right back. And so I ran upstairs. And luckily, she was apparently my daughter, 6 months at the time, a little bit older maybe. She was eating a piece of apple, got stuck in her throat. She had already coughed it up by the time I was upstairs, which, as you can imagine, was like 2 seconds after I heard my wife scream.
Shoot.
You did the right thing. You did the right thing.
So, made sure everybody was okay. I saw my wife was there, my daughter was there. My wife was more shocked than my daughter, who just continued to eat and whatever else. Made sure they were okay. I went downstairs. My heart was going, faster than it's ever gone. I finished the pitch, and they invested.
Fantastic.
Unbelievable.
That is a great victory story right there. I think Kaleem's a little frozen.
It's okay. Yeah, it was good. Unbelievable.
That is amazing. Well, you know what? I'm more happy that your daughter is okay. I mean, congratulations on the pitch, but,
Congrats,
family first.
Congrats. Wait, I missed it. Did you get the fund?
Yeah, I got the fund. They invested.
Yeah. Yes.
See that you're a human. People first. They enjoyed that. They're like, look, this person came down all in a myth, and you probably still landed it. So congratulations. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So, where can our listeners find you?
Remote.com.
Perfect.
That's it? You're not anywhere else?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. It's my name, J-O-B, and then a V and an O. So J-O-B-V-O. But remote.com. I prefer people just go to our website.
That's remote.com. It's a great domain name.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know you're super busy. And yes, important things will come back around, just like my email to get you on the show. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right.
I kept hitting it. So I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I've learned more than I bargained for today. I really appreciate you joining us. Come back again, okay?
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you. Peace out.
You've been listening to Remotely One. Visit us at remotelyone.com/podcast for upcoming episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our episodes on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, don't forget to clock out.